Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyourear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So the latest episode in the Oasis story, Mark, it's moved up a gear. Is that right? Fair to say?
Well, it's moved up a gear in that they've added 2 more dates to respond to the supposedly, I'm quite sure, 10 million applicants from 158 countries. But it's moved up a gear and it's kind of got to government level, hasn't it? This idea has been described universally as a fiasco, which is quite right. I mean, the amount of time, basically the fact that people had to queue for so long, queue to get into a queue, and then queue to get on the site, and then queue to get in the queue to buy tickets. And then eventually when they got to buy tickets, they found that the £150 standard tickets were often inflated to 350, 400 quid. So the big issues are, is it fundamentally absolutely wrong to bring in dynamic pricing? Or is it okay to do that, but it was wrong not to tell people that that's what they should expect? Because, I mean, people are rightly aggrieved, aren't they? But my feeling about it is that if you had a cottage that you're going to rent out in Cornwall or whatever, you could say, I know that's dynamic pricing in a way, but you could say that the price of that cottage is £2,000 a week. And anything less, if you get it for £500 a week in November, that's a discount because it's off peak. But the price is $2,000. But what they did here was that they announced officially, didn't they? Even the band announced that the standard ticket price would be around the area of 150 quid. So people were really, really appalled, having spent so long getting through, to then have 90 seconds to make a decision about whether or not they were going to buy one. Also, Oasis said that they thought that anything bought on secondary sites would be considered to be invalid. But of course, it's the secondary sites selling the tickets bought on the primary site for up to £2,000, which had affected the dynamic pricing of the primary site tickets. So it's all going around in circles. So I don't know. I mean, do you think Oasis, of course, claim to know nothing about it, which is fair enough. They might. Who knows? They're blaming it on their management. They're blaming it on Ticketmaster. Would they get a cut from that profit, do you think?
Listen, I'm no expert on this, but I do think that what drives dynamic pricing is the fact that when you leave these things completely to the market, so you let people buy a load of tickets, they buy 4 or whatever, and they sell 2 and then they keep 2 or whatever. People end up paying over the odds for tickets, and that money doesn't go to the act at all. It goes to touts or whatever, or individuals selling tickets on. And so the reason all this has turned into dynamic pricing is the acts have said quite reasonably, well, as reasonably as any kind of multimillionaire organization can do, they've said, well, if that money's being spent on tickets, we want it. We don't want it going to anybody else. And I can entirely understand this. Yeah. I think I've quoted this example in the past of they did some research at a Bruce Springsteen show in the States about quite a few years ago where they just identified a block of seats, and these were $50 seats or whatever. And they went around and asked everybody in those seats, how much did you pay for your ticket? And of course, some paid $50, some paid considerably more than $50. Some might even pay $500. So the block that was supposed to be worth $50,000 was actually generating $200,000 or something. And so that's what's behind it, because what's behind this is there is almost no limit to what some people will pay to gain access to what they regard as really prestige events, and it's very difficult to say. People used to talk about the true fans. I don't know what that means anymore.
What does that mean?
Because
also, if that's the price they're prepared to pay, then that's what it's worth to them. I mean, how can you say that's unfair? Because your option is don't pay it then. That was always the Rolling Stones thing. Was if you think they're too expensive, tickets don't come. That's fine. Stay at home. That's fine. There are lots of people who'd really like to come.
Absolutely. And you say it's reached government level. I mean, it'd be very interesting if politicians do advance towards this subject, sensing the fact that it's going to give them score major popularity points with the public. They will advance towards it with, trumpets blaring and banners waving. And then 6 months later, they'll retreat away from it.
They've got to be seen to be involved. Obviously, it's a vote winner.
It's a vote winner. I would love to see the select committee actually grilling not somebody from Ticketmaster, not somebody from management, but Noel Gallagher or whoever. You know what I mean? Because basically, what it's all about is, how much are bands making out of these things, and how much do they want to make? Two answers to this. One, they're making a fuck of a lot, yes.
Yeah.
How much would they like to make? A fuck of a lot more, basically, yes. I'm sorry.
Let's not get too scientific about it.
It's kind of like that. Now, the other body that is looking at this is a body I know something about, because for 6 years I was on the council, which is the Advertising Standards Authority, which is not a statutory body. It's a body set up by the advertising and marketing industry to police what you can say in marketing communications and so forth. And they've got, I think I was reading today, they've got 600 complaints or something. And at the moment, they're looking through them very carefully to see whether they're in breach, and if so, how in breach. Because it's interesting to me, the people, we traditionally used to talk about hype, and we always assumed hype was something kind of imposed from above by commercial organizations. That behind all hypes, there were a shadowy cabal of chaps smoking
cigar chewing mafia
going, listen to me, I've got a way to really pull the wool over people's eyes. This will really get them, and then they go off cackling in the corner. Because the truth is, hype is not that at all. Hype is what people do to themselves.
Yeah.
Particularly
it's self-generated. It comes from the ground up a lot of the time.
It's completely from the ground up. This is what happens when you have limited demand and limited supply. I beg your pardon. This is what happens when you have limited supply, meeting not just high demand but insane demand. This is not people who like Oasis and want to be there when they get back together again. This is at least half of these people are thinking, I've just got to be there because it's the biggest ticket of the year.
It's the big event. I've got to be there.
Yeah, and they'd be the same if,
Which is a lot of the Glastonbury appeal. I think there are people going to Glastonbury who aren't particularly sold on either the notion of Glastonbury or pop music. I can't go to my grave without saying at one stage of my life I went to Glastonbury.
And suffering from anxiety right now over a thing that is a year ahead is doubly insane, because I find it very hard to believe that 3 weeks before these shows take place, and there are a hell of a lot of these shows already. It's not like Led Zeppelin at the O2, is it? How many?
No, there's about 8. Is it 18? Something like that now.
Oh, whatever. It's quite a lot, and it's huge, great venues. I find it very hard to believe that 3 weeks before these shows take place, there won't be tickets available. I find that very hard to believe. Because I think that's what happens with these shows is they want to create mania very early on. That's why they over-announce the number of shows, so they can then go, we've outsold Taylor Swift on the Rolling Stones.
We've broken the internet.
We've broken the internet. I love all that stuff. But also, it creates these artificially high prices early on, which very often when you get 3 weeks away, they're not high prices anymore. They're probably quite cheap. Yes.
But also they've said that they're sold out. But what's their definition of sold out? Their definition is probably sold out of whatever's available. But they may well have held some back, as you say, to let those into the market just beforehand, to again recreate that momentum, which is a really important part of it. People suddenly saying, "Oh, I'm getting in there. I've just got a ticket." But I think one of the interesting things at the moment is they've got a new ballot system. How complicated is this? Which, oh gosh, I don't even begin to understand it. You've got to enter this ballot system to get yourself in the queue, and you are given a priority if you're one of the people who tried before and failed. So that's interesting because let's say they control the dynamic pricing this time around. It'd be interesting because everyone's watching, so maybe there's some pressure on them to do that. But let's say that the people who buy the further 180,000 tickets, there's 2 more nights at Wembley. I think the pre-sale is tomorrow. I think they may go on sale in the next few days. Let's say that the people who buy those for the standard rate for the 150. How are you going to feel then if you were one of the people who was the kind of early adopters who queued up originally, went through all that misery a week ago, and then finished up paying 400 quid? If the people who didn't, who bailed out, who got fed up, who just gave up, and suddenly are rewarded by the fact that they get a ticket for £250 less than you. I mean, I just can't believe the levels of kind of misery that are being inflicted on people.
It's quite interesting that a certain amount of this is priced in. You know, I know from my own offspring, you know, being of a different generation, they're kind of used to being buggered about in pursuit of.
They are.
You know, I tell you, I'll give you an example. Example of this, nothing to do with music whatsoever. You must have noticed there is a coffee outlet. I think they got one in Covent Garden. They got one in Borough Market. They've probably got loads more. Called Monmouth Coffee. Have you ever gone past Monmouth Coffee?
Yeah, I've been there.
Okay, have you gone in?
Yeah. You have to queue. We had to book. We went with my brother-in-law, who's a huge coffee connoisseur. He said, "We're going to go to Monmouth." I said, "Oh, great. I always wanted to go." I said, "The only problem is I've had to ring ahead. We're in at 3:00 and we've got till about 3:20. And we had to queue up. We put in our little booth. I mean, isn't that amazing?
Well, this is it.
It's a coffee shop, though.
Now, the point is, Mark, now I don't know how old your brother-in-law is, but whatever, you know, when you and I were kind of 25 and, you know, fancy for a young man about town, did you ever queue for anything?
No. And it's interesting. We were not really. And we were talking to Will Birch, he of the Curse of Flyers on the Records, at your book launch just the other night. And Will was just remembering how if you wanted to buy a ticket back in the old days, you either went to the venue, didn't you? Went to the box office at the
Will tell the story about it because Will used to have a job in London in the late 60s, you know, so he was very on the ball with us and very engaged music fan and so forth, regular reader of the Enemy. And of course, you could get the Enemy in London a day before you could get it in the rest of the country. And then you'd pick it up, you'd read on the news pages, a new group called Cream or The Cream or whatever are playing, I don't know where. And so he would immediately go to Keith Prowse, the booking agent, who was everywhere on every street.
Shaftesbury Ave, and they would ring up and reserve for you, wouldn't they?
Well, no, he'd have a check or possibly a postal order. And he'd get his tickets for, you know, they'd probably be, well, they wouldn't even be 10 bob, I would imagine, you know, in old money. But as I was saying
you go away patting your pocket, secure in the knowledge that a piece of paper, physical piece of paper.
Yeah, but you weren't going to meet anybody else. Here's the point that I was trying to make it when we were talking to Will. You weren't going to meet anybody else in your average week who was in the universe for buying Cream tickets. It was a very minority pursuit.
It was. You might see somebody in a greatcoat on the other side.
A number of very long-haired people in London in 1967 it's not a lot. It's not many people. That's later on when that grew, you know. Whereas the universe of people who decide they want to go and see Oasis in a stadium is absolutely massive and keeps on growing. And probably we're just adding to it by, you know, talking about it here. And every news outlet you turn on or every newspaper you pick up, they're all going on about it.
On that point, it's interesting hearing particularly the radio stuff on Radio 4 about it, is that most of the people commented, most of the presenters, feel obliged to make clear whether or not they applied for the tickets. And, of course, the majority of them did apply for tickets. Some got them, some didn't. This is Today programme presenters, because they, again, don't want to feel that they're not involved or they don't care. And the ones that haven't applied for tickets go into enormous cartwheels to kind of explain why they haven't, because I kind of feel that I've seen Oasis at their prime and it would let me down to see the reunions or generally. So it's become such an issue that to have not, and members of parliament who are talking about it have to make clear that they too wait in the queue for a long time because we're all involved. You and I are possibly the only people, Dave, who haven't waited in the queue. Much I quite like to see Oasis, actually, because I like Oasis a lot.
But it's interesting, going back to the Monmouth coffee thing, that, if you book a kind of hip restaurant at the West End, they want you in there at 1:45, not 2 or whatever. It's re-emphasized to you at every stage how fortunate you are to be able to give them your money. That's kind of how it works. And you know where that goes back to? The invention of clubbing. Because clubbing introduces the red rope and introduces the all-powerful security person and the door Nazi and all that, where we can't have too many blokes in here, we can't have large groups. We want people who look right, and they're kind of trying to control the vibe and so forth. And so this generation, younger generations than us, let's put it that way, are quite used to the idea that they will be discriminated against.
They're used to the idea that you can just go for a pint at the Slug and Lettuce, and there's going to be somebody outside in a suit with a thin tie with a coil in their ear, deciding whether or not they should be allowed in wearing that hat. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. So the people. My offspring, they sort of feel if anything's easy to get into, it's probably not worth going to.
Probably not very good.
Which is, right. Which is kind of wrong, really, And but if you go back to, and I'm sure on this case, I'm sure it could have been done better. I don't doubt that at all, but equally sure that there's a lot of pontificating and hot air around it. But you still have the basic problem that if you've got insane demand and you've got people who will pay above the odds, that's what's going to happen. The price is going to go up to that point, and you only have to look at the cars parked down your street to realize that people nowadays spend money they don't need to spend because the results of that expenditure are in some way impressive. I know. I
feel that a lot about cars in London.
Yeah, absolutely.
The place where you're not allowed to go more than, in some places around here, 20 miles an hour. Then you've got a 4-litre engine or whatever. But I think we should mention at this point, in sublime contrast to the digital fiasco of the dynamic ticket pricing thing, the David Gilmour promotional story. Are you following this?
I just saw this.
Yeah. I think it's really sweet.
It's David Gilmour.
Very quaint to the extent that I opened up our copy of The Guardian, which we still get delivered every day, and there's a full page ad for his album, which in itself is unusual. But anyway,
wow.
David Gilmour, old school. His thing, this is a kind of golden ticket thing, isn't it? What they've done is they have booked in 7 local papers in the United Kingdom. Today, I think, they have booked spaces where they have printed a lyric from the album and hidden elsewhere in that edition a character from the artwork. The album's called Luck and Strange, and there's a central character depicted on the front. And the first people to find them in each of those individual 7 UK local newspapers who send a picture of them and themselves proving they've got it, whatever, get a deluxe box set. And I love this. I'm sorry. I like it. I mean, I don't know how much excitement this is causing. Maybe it's just people like me who just love old analog ruses. But I just love the idea that there are people now. I mean, also it'd be interesting to know whether or not that couldn't be leaked. You'd think if you were on the local newspaper that had that space booked Gilmour's management company, you'd be very hard-pressed not to tip people off about it. And people must know by now which the 7 papers are. But it's a good idea, isn't it?
I think you may be overestimating the amount of desperate desire there is out there for a copy of the Dave Gilmour album, Luck and Strange. But having said that, I think it's all very good because it's good for local newspapers. And I think it's really good that he's done that, because it creates a bit of a buzz around local newspapers, and people are probably going out and buying the copy of the Yorkshire Post or whatever it is happens to be in their region. It totally reminded me of. Well, I'm not old enough to directly remember these things, but they were always talked about in fiction. That one of the popular newspaper promotion ruses in the post-war, well, in the 30s and in the post-war period, would be that the newspapers would hire somebody to walk around, let's say at a seaside resort during a bank holiday, and they would print a picture of this person in their paper, and the holidaymakers would be invited to look out for this person, and if they saw them, to go and approach them and say, "You are so-and-so, so-and-so, and I claim my free copy of the Daily Express," or possibly if you're the first person to do it that day, you might get a crisp £5 note. That was very much the old school way of doing this. I think the Daily Express had a very famous campaign in this vein where the character was called Lobby Lud. This is so wonderfully old-fashioned.
This is brilliant.
And to the extent that I don't know why the headmaster of my school, when I started there in 1961, used to be called Lobby. And if you asked why, they always say it's because some ancient joke about Lobby Lud and the Daily Express and so forth. Isn't Graham Greene's in Brighton Rock, and isn't it in the movie that a key character in the movie is, because it's Brighton and it's bank holiday, is you're trying to identify the man from the local paper who's wandering around, see if you can get a £5.
Oh, it could be.
It could be. So I'm all in favour.
I love those things.
I'm all in favour of things, people who do things involving local newspapers, which are very threatened species and hugely important to societal well-being and all kinds of things. One
other analogue thing was the story of John Lydon's tour.
Oh God!
Are you following that? Now this, I think, it's just extraordinary. John Lydon has just announced yesterday that he's doing, I think it's 48 dates around the UK. I looked at some of the venues and they're kind of, 500-seater capacity up to maybe the maximum 1,000, but they're around the 500, 600, 700, whatever. They're not enormous, but he's doing 48 of them anyway. This is next autumn. And he is simply talking. Now, John, that's really interesting. He's got no album to sell. He had 2 memoirs out, one a long time ago, one, again, several years ago. So he's not promoting a new book. He's got no product to sell. He's just, this is what he does for a living. He talks. And I think it's really interesting because you think of the people who like to go and see him perform. There's the quite restricted number of people who are prepared to put up with Public Image Limited, which is a group that I love in principle, but I don't know if I can endure actually in person. But I like the idea of them. And then there's the Sex Pistols who refuses to rejoin. And even if he did, it would be a fairly miserable experience, possibly. So those are the people who go and see him if he was playing live. But if he chooses to talk rather than play, that makes him surely enormously more appealing. Because John Lydon, we've interviewed him on this podcast. He was fantastic, Dave, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He was fantastic. He talked about his incredibly cash-strapped childhood in Islington. He talked about being thrown out of the house by his father when he was 15. He talked about the period of time he was in hospital. He talked about the whole of the punk rock wars. And then if you throw anything at him, any type of music, any politician, whatever, any kind of pop cultural thing, he's got an incendiary viewpoint, which is really worth hearing. A lot of it's pantomime, a lot of it's theatre, and it's just positioning. Who knows whether he means it or not? I have absolutely no idea. But the idea of John Lydon just talking is interesting. And it made me think, have we got to a point where you would rather hear some people talk than play? Because I think we have, and I can think of a few, and I'm sure you can.
Well, definitely, because, it's not that surprising, really, is it? Because, what are rock stars but they're kind of musicians, but they're mainly personalities.
Yeah.
Because if you want to hear music, there's loads of people who can play music, but it's a combination of music and personality that makes a rock star. And so why wouldn't you be interested in the personality? Undoubtedly it makes sense in John Lydon's case, and there are other people. I mean, there's people like Jarvis Cocker, I would have thought, could go out perfectly happily and just talk, and people were very happy.
Jarvis Cocker, impossibly witty.
And also the other thing about Jarvis Cocker, very interesting, important point, very nice speaking voice. People like listening to him, and that's an important thing. I mean, it's probably missed boat as far as doing it now, but she could have done it a few years ago. Marianne Faithfull.
Marianne Faithfull's a really good idea, because a lot of that, do you want to hear tremulous ballads from the 60s, or that slightly more challenging stuff she did in the late 70s, or do you want to hear her story? Because I think it's, her view of the 1960s from inside the bubble would be absolutely brilliant. Her whole, the world of the Stones, etc. I think that the same about Jarvis Cocker in the 90s, actually. That Jarvis Cocker's view of the 90s as seen from the inside, and the position he was in, and the long period it took them. I can't remember how many years was it before Pulp was successful, 13, 14 or whatever. A road full of potholes. That's really interesting, I think. I think John Cooper Clarke, although he's not really a musician, I mean, as effectively he's a talk artist too, John Cooper Clarke talking about the 50s and 60s.
He does this already, doesn't he?
He does it already. I mean, he just talks about...
Because what he does, what people like him do, and John Lydon could do it, and as you say, he's already written 2 autobiographies, is they perform their autobiography live. That's effectively what they do.
Yeah.
And live, you can make it go in all kinds of directions. You can tell stories you'd never told before. You can focus on areas that you'd never focused on before. They're perfectly happily.
You can take questions.
I mean, there's also those people. There's musicians where you might want to hear the music, but actually the speech is just brilliant. I mean, Randy Newman, again, getting old now, to probably wouldn't feel like doing it anymore. But, there was a time, and I've seen Randy Newman loads of times, and what he has to say is so interesting.
It's fantastic. Randy Newman about, again, the shifting sands of pop culture and politics.
Elvis Costello,
very good.
I'm sure I talked about this before. Last time I saw Elvis, it was a press conference for his last, it was a kind of press event for his last album, and he turned up at Ronnie Scott's. It was a lunchtime thing, and Matt Everett was supposed to be the guy interviewing him, and Matt Everett, I think, pretty much only asked one question, and that was, "You must have been here before," and he just. And it was perfect. I'm not knocking it. Perfectly good question. Perfectly good direction to steer him in. Because Elvis just went, first time I came, I sat on that table with my father. We came to see so-and-so, so-and-so. Second time I came, I sat on that table. And he just, because
his memory is incredible.
His memory is fantastic. He has that gift. And it's a writer's gift, which God knows a lot of people don't have. Of working out which bits of his experience are interesting and can be turned into stories, and which bits are
to
not.
abandon.
He's absolutely brilliant.
And also, he's really brilliant technically. I mean, he talking about music. I mean, I was thinking, if you were given the option of Elvis talking about songwriting, his knowledge of music, his understanding of the mechanics of songwriting, we both interviewed him several times, is phenomenal. Yeah. Would you rather sit there in Ronnie Scott's or whatever and listen to Elvis talking about why the Kinks was so brilliant, dismantling the structure of Small Faces songs, talking about Jamaican rocksteady, things he knows lots about, or watch him do another version of Watching Detectives? I mean, I think it'd be the former every time, don't you?
Well, I would.
The thing is that if you hear a song is familiar, if you hear a comment, it's usually a revelation. It's something you didn't know and you come away remembering it. It's like that whole thing about what do you remember about the concerts you went to? What differentiates them from the one they played last night and will play tomorrow? It's often the things they say. That famous thing about Bob Dylan doing that joke, oh, my ex-wife's left me again. She's a tennis player. Love means nothing to her. The people who were at that concert when he said that in whatever it was, the early 90s, are still talking about it today because it made that a different concert.
I never forgotten, getting, when we were at Smash Hits all those years ago, getting letters from readers who'd been to see, and these are like 15-year-olds, who'd been to see Duran Duran.
I remember those
too. And they always said the same thing. And they spoke to us.
Yeah.
It's the speech,
and they would recount exactly what they'd said. And John, looking at me, I think, John Taylor said, "It's really great to be here in Colchester." And it was.
But so many musicians have a real mental block about this, that they think, and it particularly applies within bands, because there's always one who's a bit more talkative than the rest, and the rest like to show their disapproval by kind of glowering behind his back when he's talking, And so they pretend people don't want to hear speech; they want to hear our new album. No, they don't.
No, they don't.
They want to hear speech, actually,
not remotely.
Or they want to feel a story is being told in some way, and the more speech you have, this goes back to Robert Forster's 10 Rules of Rock and Roll, or whatever his book was called, that an act, a musical act, doesn't have a lot of narrative to it, and what people like about an evening out, whether it's the cinema or comedy or the theatre, is narrative is what people like. Narrative, people like to feel things are going somewhere.
Yeah,
and they like to feel, it's a climax here, and then it falls away from that. I can feel this is going somewhere. And most songs don't have narrative at all.
No, didn't James Taylor? I think both James Taylor and Ray Davies both did tours at one point where they would play whatever greatest hits, but they would precede the performance of that song by talking about the context of it being written and how it was written.
Well, James Taylor did. I saw him do a fabulous...
And James Taylor did it with slides of the family, isn't it?
Slideshow of anything. And obviously James Taylor, just having a massive repertoire, he could just load up the slide projector or whatever it was with like 50 pictures and then pretty much say to the guy at the desk, just pick one. And then he'd go, "Oh, yes, this is a picture from Time magazine in 1911. This is a man who was found buried in the permafrost." And then he'd sing The Frozen Man or whatever. And then, "This is my mother. Let me tell you about my mother. This is the house that Carly Simon and I had on." And it was just, honestly,
it's mesmerizing.
The increase in engagement from the audience because you were giving them something more than just a song. Every single person in that hall went, "Oh, God, right. Oh, now
I think how much you'd have to say, because otherwise you come away from a concert and say, how was it? Well, they played my favourite songs and they played them really well. That doesn't translate to somebody who's not interested, and even somebody who's interested can't quite understand your personal experience. But to come away and say, he told this story.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And so going back to John Lydon's 48 days, whatever he's doing, he's got a fairly good chance that all 48 will be quite different from each of the 48 will be quite different from the others.
I think they will.
He'll do a certain amount of stuff that's the same.
And depending on the place he's in, too, and that relating to the Sex Pistols. Well, I think it's really interesting. And I think there's a lot more. I mean, there's others. I think Donald Fagen's another example. Much I'd love to see Donald Fagen play, but Donald Fagen, amazing storyteller. Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. You and I have interviewed him a couple of times. Phenomenal. Ian Anderson's phenomenal. I'm afraid to say, and I don't no disrespect to Jethro Tull, who as a kid I used to love. I wouldn't, Wild Horses would not get me to one of their shows. But talking to him, he was a very modest bloke, actually, about what the conquest of America in the 1970s, whatever. Absolutely brilliant. And the other two people I thought would be interesting, both of whom will get to the point fairly soon, possibly one of them in fact probably has, where they will retire from playing, are Elton John and Rod Stewart. Well, we've both interviewed both of them. Phenomenal. Elton John, just absolutely extraordinary anecdotalist. Rod Stewart, everything he says is funny and interesting and well observed, And Rod Stewart, once he's got to the point where he may not be playing anymore, could quite easily go out and simply tour. And someone could ask him questions and he could simply talk about his life and what he's been to. And I think that would sell really well.
Oh, I'm sure it would. I don't that at all. In fact, people will be paying £500 on the secondary market and questions will be asked in the house, no doubt. So I'm going to finish with, I think you've got a nomination for the best band name anybody's ever come up with. Is that right?
Well, I was reading a bit of Mike Batt's autobiography, which is very good. In fact, we're talking to him in a week or so's time. And he talks about one of the groups he worked with. And I'd forgotten this name and how much I loved it. And I think it may actually be the best band name of all time. And it's Steppenwolf.
Right.
Dave, that's a good name.
So that comes from a novel, isn't it? Herman Hesse.
It was a Herman Hesse novel, wasn't it?
It's a Herman Hesse novel. I know nothing about the novel.
A Steppenwolf, I think, was a species of grey wolf. It's a lone wolf from I can't remember, from around the area of the Caspian Sea, I think it was. But I always thought that was the most mesmerising name, Steppenwolf.
It's a kind of name that's never gone out of fashion. You know, when it first appeared in the late 60s, it sounded cool. And it kind of still sounds cool now, doesn't it, really? It could have been attached to an indie group or a Britpop group.
Completely.
Anybody, at any stage. Could have been a kind of a Prodigy type kind of rave group, couldn't it?
It could.
You know, it just works in any era.
In any context, it does.
Shall I tell you the other odd thing about Steppenwolf while we're here is John Kay, who was the leader of Steppenwolf. Is he still? I think he's still with us.
I think he's still with us.
I think he's still with us.
He's smuggled across the border in a sack now. There's some story.
He is, I think I'm right in saying, the only rock name who could claim to have been born under the rulership of Adolf Hitler. Because I think he was Austrian, wasn't he, originally?
Yeah.
And Austria, with the Anschluss, became part of the Greater Germany and so forth. And I think he was born during the Second World War, when Hitler was the government. There aren't many rock names who could say that, can there? I couldn't think of any others. Maybe people can.
He was smuggled across the border, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I can't remember the story.
The partition at the end of
it was much older than we realised at the time.
Yes, yeah, that's true. So, is that it for us for another week? It probably is.
It probably is.
It only remains to say that if you're feeling unappreciated in this life, if the day is grey and doesn't look full of any great prospects, and you're thinking, what could I possibly do? What could little me, what could I possibly do to increase even fractionally the sum of human happiness? Well, there is something you can do, isn't there, Mark? You could, if you haven't already done this, you could become a Word in Your Ear supporter on Patreon, thus ensuring that this guttering flame, which has been going on since 2006, will never go out. Okay, and will be in
the eternal flame.
The eternal flame, in the words of the Bangles. Or was it Rudyard Kipling? I forget.
Was it the Bangles or Rudyard Kipling? That is the essence of this podcast. Those are the kind of things that keep us up all night.
That's a good theme for a quiz in the future. Is it the Bangles or Rudyard Kipling? So if you want to know how you might possibly be involved as a Patreon supporter, and thus know that you earn our undying affection and respect, you go to patreon.com/word in your ear and find out how you could get involved and, fill your boots.
See you next week.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.